So we're being asked to add these two fractions. 3 over 4 plus 1 over 2. So the first thing that we want to notice is that, excuse me, is to look at the denominator of both of these fractions. The denominator is the amount that each fraction is cut up into, because we have two fractions. We have this first one, 3 over 4, and we have the second one, 1 over 2. The first fraction is cut up into 4 slices. And the second fraction, without even looking at the number on the top, the first fraction is cut up into 4 parts. And the second fraction is cut up into 2 parts. And so that's going to be a problem when we are trying to add these two fractions together. So the first thing that we want to do is to get these two denominators to be the same number. And a really common way of doing that is to simply multiply each denominator by each other. So multiply both of the denominators. In this instance, we have 4 times 2, because those are the 2 digits for the denominators. And that's going to give us 8. So what we're going to do is write 8 over to the side twice. Once for the first fraction, which is we're going to put right here, and once for the second fraction, and we're going to put right there. And we can put our addition sign right there. So looking at this first fraction, 3 over 4, we started with 4 as the denominator, and we wound up with 8 as our denominator. So that means we scaled this fraction denominator by 2. We scaled the denominator by 2. So we have to maintain balance and scale the numerator by the same amount. We're going to scale the numerator by 2, which is going to give us 6. Likewise, for this second fraction in this equation, we started with 2 as our denominator, and we ended up with 8. So we scaled this denominator by 4. So we have to do the same thing for the numerator of the second fraction. And that's going to give us 4. And now that we have the denominators, now that we have each fraction cut up into the same amount of slices, now we can go through with our computation and operation of addition. So now all we have to do is, again, make sure that we maintain the balance by scaling up the numerator, and now we can just add across. So we got 6 over 8 plus 4 over 8. So the denominators stay the same all the way through. When you're adding fractions, the denominator does not change. As long as the denominators are the same, that's what's important. So we keep the denominator as 8, and we add 6 and 4, which is going to give us 10. And that will be our answer. So 3 over 4 plus 1 over 2 is 10 over 8. We're going to do another example to kind of massage this idea. So let's say we have 3 over 7 plus, let's do 4 over 5. 3 over 7 plus 4 over 5. Again, the first thing that we want to pay attention to is if the denominators are the same. And we can see that these two denominators are not the same. You know, this being the first fraction, this being the second fraction. The two denominators are not the same, so that's the first thing that we have to address. And the way that we're going to address it is by simply multiplying the denominators by each other. So 7 times 5, that will be 35. And we're going to write 35 for both of those fractions as the new denominator. And looking at this first fraction, 3 over 7, we started with a denominator of 7, and we ended up with a denominator of 35. So we scaled up this denominator by 5, so we have to do the same for the numerator, 3. Scale that up by 5, which is going to give us 15. And again, for our second fraction, 4 over 5, we started with 5 as our denominator, and we ended with 35 as our new denominator. So we scaled up this by 7, and so we have to similarly scale up the numerator of 4. We have to scale that up by 7, which is going to give us 28. And again, now that we have our two fractions cut up in the same amount of slices, and we made sure that our numerators were scaled up as well, now we simply add across. The denominator does not change. And 15 plus 28, that'll be what? 43. Okay. That'll be 43. And so our answer to 3 over 7 plus 4 over 5 is going to be 43 over 35. We'll talk about simplification later. Let's go to another example. Let's say we have, let's go 1 over 10 plus 3 over 4 plus, let's do 3 over 6. So what do we do in this case? Again, it's the same exact principle. We have to make sure that these three fractions, it doesn't matter if it's 2 or 3 or 4 or more, when you're adding fractions, they have to always have the same denominator. They have to all be cut up into the same amount of pieces, even if you have to make it like that, which is what we have to do with this problem. So we got a denominator of 10, 4, and 6. What's something that these numbers all share in common? That looks like it's going to be 120. It's going to be 120. And the way we do that, let's just multiply 10 times 4. Actually, we'll go 240 just to keep it simple. But so we got 10 times 4, which is going to be 40. And then 40 times 6, which is going to be 240, yes. And so we're going to write 240 for all three of these fractions. Plus 240. Now, for this first fraction, again, we circle this, and we started with 10 as our denominator, and we wound up with 240 as our denominator. So we scaled this denominator up by 24. 10 times 24 is 240. So we have to do the same thing for this numerator of 1. We have to scale that up by 24. And that will give us 24, of course. Likewise, for our second fraction, we started with 4 as our denominator, and we ended up with 240 as our denominator. And that will be 60, if I am not mistaken. We scaled up this denominator by 60. 60 times 4 equals 240. So we have to scale up this numerator to make sure the fraction stays balanced. We have to do the same thing to the numerator. 60 times 3, that'll be 180. So we'll put that for our new numerator over here. And lastly, we have 6. We started with 6 for this third fraction. We started with 6 as our denominator, and we somehow wound up at 240. And the way that happened is so we scaled up this denominator by 40. 6 times 40 is 240. So again, to make sure that the fraction stays balanced, we have to also multiply the numerator by 40. Let's see, different color. 40. And so 40 times 3, that will be 120. So now all that there is left to do, and again, given that we have our denominators the same, all there is left to do is to add these numerators. So let's do that. We have 240 as our denominator. And 180 plus 120, that is 300. And 300, this is 300. 300 plus 24, of course, that'll be 324. So this is our final answer. 1 over 10 plus 3 over 4 plus 3 over 6 is 324 over 240. And we'll talk about simplifying later.